Great, thank you, Rolf. That's a rather interesting image that you create there with the turnover of money or the velocity of money, and of course that's vitally important to a strong economy, the velocity of money, that is. How many times a particular piece of currency, let's say a $10 or a $20 bill, transfers and goes from one hand to another in the transaction of commerce, industry, business, basically. And let me introduce myself. Let me perhaps take a step back, just tell you about who I am and what I stand for. Ed G. Heflin. G actually technically is my middle initial, but I like to say it stands for green at this point in time. I'm running for Connecticut State Senatorial Seat District 36. That includes Greenwich, that includes New Canaan, and that includes Stamford, aka what I would like to characterize as the banking district or corridor of Connecticut. So what I'm all about really is about bringing green back to the state of Connecticut and bringing green to Hartford through my candidacy and election on a public banking platform. I'll talk a little bit more about the public banking platform, but I can assure you it is the only platform presently that allows and paves the way for what I've dubbed the 4 E's. And those stand for the economy, education, the environment, and energy. And all 4 of these things can be addressed through a public banking, essentially a keystone or cornerstone public banking platform, which is what I'm all about. So, what is public banking? Well, public banking at its most fundamental descriptive form is democratic banking. It's banking for, of, and by the people in one sense. And probably the best example that I can give you of the success that public banking could bring to the state of Connecticut in terms of revitalizing the economy, in terms of creating new businesses, fostering new jobs through those new businesses, building communities, and upgrading our lifestyles, or at least maintaining the lifestyles that we have. I can point to the Bank of North Dakota, which is a state bank for the state of North Dakota that over the last 10 years alone, perhaps a little bit longer than that actually, has given back almost $500 million to its constituents, the citizens of the state of North Dakota. It has, in other words, it has not only survived, and this particular bank, the Bank of North Dakota, is 96 years old and counting at this point in time, has been so successful, it has survived the end of World War I, through the Second World War, through the Great Depression from roughly 1929 to perhaps the beginning of the Second World War, 1937, 1938, 1940 for the United States, and on through the other additional wars later on that followed World War II, that includes the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the present slurry of different wars, unfortunately, that we're involved with in the Middle East. As well as in 1987 and in 2008, the most recent financial crisis, in which year, by the way, in 2008, the Bank of North Dakota, if I'm not mistaken, gave $30 million back to the state coffers. That's how successful it has been. So at this point in time, the public banking is presently being considered by roughly 22, 23 different states. In other words, 22 or 23 states of the United States are considering legislation that's at some point along the process of getting the idea out from the people into a legislative forum and finally into a law where they've actually got a state bank for the particular state in consideration. What I would do when I go to Hartford, the very first thing on my agenda is going to be to introduce a bill and or create a committee that would be dedicated to the introduction of legislation for a state bank of Connecticut. What would that give us? Here's what it gives us. Right off the bat, it would take what we presently have, and by the way, you would be able to see this particular page on my candidacies page website, either on ctgreenparty.org or associated with my Facebook page as well too. So this is the present system that we have right now, which involves essentially banking where the taxpayer is up here at the top, the central bank in the middle here turns out to be Wall Street, and to the left here is the collection source, or the treasury for the state of Connecticut. The treasurer for the state of Connecticut, presently Denise Napier, is very happy with less than 1% return on our capital, on the revenues, on the taxes, on the fees that are paid into the state coffers that are merely sent to Wall Street. And from Wall Street, they're disseminated in different sorts of activities that Wall Street does, for which we probably don't have a clue, the average citizen in the state of Connecticut. But I can tell you, generally those go into derivatives, they go into other sorts of, as you can see from the diagram over here, the last column here, they go into the stock market, they go into the bond markets. But basically, they go into securities or instruments for securities that don't directly affect or help the people of the state of Connecticut. And that's one of the big differentiators between the present system that we have and the system for public banking that I'm advocating in the state of Connecticut. And what does that system look like? Well, it's down here. I've got a bigger diagram, so I'll switch to that right now, that talks about what benefits we derive here in Connecticut. The citizens of the state of Connecticut as taxpayers would pay their taxes into, of course, the state government, which would put the money and invest the money into the state bank, much like North Dakota presently does. And in the process, the state bank, which would be essentially the board of which would be controlled by committee headed by the governor, likely would have a treasurer. The board would be elected and would be completely visible to the public, so there would be complete accountability. The governor likely would sit at the head of the board, chairman of the board. There would be a state treasurer likely associated with the board, either the comptroller or the head of commerce or the head of industrial development in Connecticut would also be on the board, as well as other elected or appointed business officials from industry, from commerce, from banking on that board associated with the bank. Once the bank then has accumulated the various funds, it will allocate, according to the budget, it will allocate those funds for various projects, which include things like, for example, solar systems over here, the building of new housing, the building of other sorts of infrastructure projects, etc. The point is, we have full control. We know exactly where our funds are going, and after all, those are the funds from the citizens of the state of Connecticut, which would serve local businesses, which would extend credit to develop new businesses in the state of Connecticut. Furthermore, taking advantage of something which is entirely legal and every bank participates in, called fractional reserve banking. So instead of, on the one hand, our present system, which involves essentially Wall Street as the central banker for ourselves, we would establish our own central banking associated with the state of Connecticut over here, versus the Wall Street scenario that we presently operate, the present paradigm that we operate under right now. In which case, the 0.14% that our treasurer, Denise Napier, is so happy with, we would multiply that with conservative fractional reserve banking leverage ratios of roughly 10 times, in other words, 1,000%. Now, I was at a candidate campaigning event just last weekend, and I can't tell you how many people, how many young children I asked, which is bigger, 1,000 or less than 1. Every single one of them knew that 1,000 was bigger than 0.1. Actually 0.14, which is the average that we get. I have the reports right here. You're happy to, I would be happy if you would look at them. You can download them freely from the State Treasurer's Office website. So that's what we're talking about with public banking at its very core. Now, the implementation of public banking is a little bit more detailed than that. It's not quite the retail banking that you might be familiar with. For example, when you walk into either a credit union or a savings and loan institution or some sort of a major banking institution, perhaps a national or multinational banking institution here in Connecticut, and are presented, make your deposit, are given back a receipt for that deposit, which, by the way, is actually an IOU. I won't discuss the implications of laws that were passed in 2012 that essentially indicated that the federal government as well as the state government can now cypress your deposits. In other words, those truly are IOUs that you're rendered. With a state bank, it would be different. It would be insured by the state itself, its assets, the full backing of the faith and credit of the state of Connecticut. So it would be a banker's bank, and it would be a bank that extends credit, possibly participates in some of the loan origination, but much of that loan origination would happen seamlessly as it does now when you go down to your local savings and loan or down to your local credit union. The state bank would participate either in conjunction with or participate in the secondary market, purchasing up some of the loans that are on the books so that those particular local credit unions, bank savings and loans can go and extend additional origination of loans to you, and thereby free up credit, the absolute necessary credit that presently has all but dried up after 2008, the financial crisis, so as to be able to allow businesses to, first of all, survive, and secondarily, new businesses to grow, and in the process, creating jobs. Now, it's estimated that in terms of job creation, the actual numbers, if we looked at even a simple $1 million allocation to a state bank in the state of Connecticut, that roughly translates to $1 billion in potential loans and assets that it can make available to new businesses, to present businesses to help grow their businesses, to infrastructure projects, et cetera. That translates roughly into 500 to 600 new jobs that are created just in that simple banking scenario where you've taken $100 million from the stiff account, let's say, allocated it to the creation of a public bank, with fractional reserve banking, of course, being under consideration for further capitalization and development of that bank. The fact of the matter is we have almost $6 billion right now associated with the stiff account, the short-term investment fund account. And that's the account that I'm referring to that gets a meager 0.14%. And that's, again, the account I'm referring to, that if we allocated to a state bank would be able to multiply that by at least 10 times. In other words, you're getting 1,000% ROI versus the 0.14% ROI that we get from Wall Street. So a public state bank of Connecticut giving us 1,000% return. The present scenario, present paradigm of investment through Wall Street and its somewhat at times specious, highly leveraged vehicles, including interest rate derivatives, foreign exchange derivatives, swaps, equity investment in equity markets around the world, not just in the United States, et cetera. So that having been said,
excuse me, Mike, you wanted to discuss about ballot access, so?
Sure. Yeah. Okay, we'll finish up and then we can.
let me finish up quickly here then. So I've discussed in fairly great detail, conceptually at least, what public banking in the state of Connecticut would look like and the advantages it would provide us right out of the box. Let me talk a little bit, and that kind of covers economy. Once you have economy back on track, and by the way, the economic situation in Connecticut, unfortunately, like about 46 other states in the United States, does not look good over the next 3 years. In the state of Connecticut, they're projecting the OLR, I believe, the Office of Legislative Research, is projecting billion-dollar-plus deficits in the budget. I think in 2015, that's looking to be about 1.15 billion. In 2016, it's 1.25, and in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's $1.35 billion in deficits. In addition, we have over 65 and growing $1 billion, with a B, $65 billion in unfunded liabilities. Those kind of numbers can only be addressed when you begin to talk about a solution that introduces banking at a completely different level, at a level that's much higher and gives us much greater return on our investment than we presently have. So again, economy is the first of my 4 E's. Education, in education herein I stand very much for, given my background as well too, improving the average school rankings and ratings and holding teachers essentially accountable. This whole notion of Common Core has some elements which are somewhat questionable, I have to admit, and it's my opinion that the more fundamental things to address are the 3 R's, as when I was growing up. That includes the reading, writing, and arithmetic. If you can get those fundamentals squared away, I think everything else falls in place as far as education. Energy, let me just touch on briefly here. My platform will essentially align itself with sustainable alternative energy, trying to implement infrastructure and giving preferential treatment, perhaps banking or credit extensions, to businesses that emphasize sustainable, alternative, green type energy as solutions. And that's not to entirely cut out some of the oil-based or some of the coal-based that may be absolutely necessary for manufacturing during a transition period to more sustainable and green energies. Finally, environment. My platform is very much in line with the Department of Energy and Environment Protection's implementation of the Connecticut Environmental Protection Act. As a matter of fact, I should point out that the incumbent against whom I am running has been, not my words, but the Conservative League of Voters has been rated at a lifetime score of roughly 69%. By the way, 69% in most schools is failing in just about every subject, but in this case, L. Scott France has merited a 69% lifetime score, the lowest of all senators. Not my words, you can look it up for yourself. Of all, you simply can't do worse. But what I'm offering you is a platform wherein we can do a lot better and we can shore up our fiscal crisis that is staring us right now in the face as though it were a two-barreled shotgun.